Let's turn now to exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity. We've got about 10 minutes left, according to my timer that I'm looking at over on my shelf, and we won't take very long. I'm going to read something from Dr. James White. We have been working our way through this little table that you can see on my screen right now. It's a chart put together by CARM, Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, and it's a chart where we've got a column on the Father, a column on the Son, a column on the Holy Spirit, and we've got cells out to the left that form a type of a table that helps us, a row, that helps us talk about how that the Father is called God, the Son is called God, the Holy Spirit is called God, and then the Father is creator, Son is creator, Holy Spirit is creator, the Father resurrects, the Son resurrects, the Holy Spirit resurrects, the Father indwells, the Son indwells, the Holy Spirit indwells. And you get the idea that the Bible is a unified whole when taken in all of its parts and put all back together on the table rather than cherry picking. The overall message of the Bible is that we've got one God, but yet he's complex in his nature. So much so that we can see the three persons, even though it doesn't have the word persons in the Bible. We can see personhood being displayed for us in the sense that we are persons. We can see God displaying to us the fact that he has this complexity to him where he's one God, but yet there are different roles and functions and attributes that are assigned, and the Bible portrays them so that we can understand that he has this complexity to him. So we've been working our way basically through John 1:1, and we took a lot of time to focus on contrasting the Orthodox Christian position against the Jehovah's Witnesses, or perhaps maybe in a oneness Pentecostal position where there's only one God, a Unitarian versus a Trinitarian position. Recall Dr. Dale Tuggy versus everyone else who's a Unitarian, or everyone else who's a Trinitarian. That's kind of how we've been spinning the commentary for a while. And tonight we're going to finally transition a little bit away from John 1:1 and move into John 1:14. As we can see, Carm has 1:14 listed there. So let's turn now to John 1:14. Let me just read the passage for you real quick out of a few different versions, and then we won't take too long. I'm going to start reading Dr. White's study here for us. John 1:14 in this parallel version, as you can see, ESV has, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we've seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And we could read it like, let me just pull, say, KJV. "And the Word became flesh," "and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." And the reason I brought at least two different versions to the table, let me show you this in... let's see, only begotten, is because there's a phrase, this phrase that we're going to see here in a moment, the glory as of the only Son from the Father, only Son, versus only begotten that shows up in other versions. So KJV has only begotten of the Father, but the Christian Standard Bible says only Son from the Father. The ESV that I read earlier has only Son from the Father, and many other versions have only Son from the Father. The NASB this time has only begotten from the Father. So this alerts us to the fact that there probably is some variance and things like that. Indeed, if we look at the Greek, we'll see that there's a way to, when I say variance, I mean varying ways of understanding the way the Greek manuscripts read. Right now I've got John 1:14 pulled up out of the Greek. Let me just read this for you. Is this one I want to read? Yeah. The Greek says, "Kai halaga sârξ ἐγένετο kai ἐσκήνωσεν İμῖν kai ἐθεασάμεθα tein dόξαν αὐτοῦ dόξαν hos monogenous παρά Πατρός πλήρης χάριτος kai ἀληθείας." And the phrase that we're going to be focusing on a bit is dόξαν hos monogenous, a glory as of an only begotten, and will include παρά Πατρός, as of the Father. Specifically, this one Greek word, monogenous, of an only begotten. What does it mean that Jesus is the only begotten? Is the only? Why do some translations leave out the word begotten in it and use something like only Son or something like that? Let's look at, begin to look at this. Maybe I'll finish this tonight. Maybe I won't finish it tonight. I don't want to rush it. Remember, the Watchtower Society takes the position that Jesus is a creature. He's the first of God's created creatures. and he's a unique creature. And in Jehovah's Witnesses version that I've got pulled up right now for you on the screen, jw.org, John 1:14 says, "So the Word became flesh and resided among us, and we had a view of his glory, a glory such as belongs to an only begotten," so they use the word begotten, son, "from a father, and he was full of divine favor and truth." And their commentary about the Word becoming flesh and being begotten, I want to focus only on the only begotten part. Let's read that part out of the Jehovah's Witnesses translation. An only begotten son, the Greek word monogenous, traditionally translated only begotten, has been defined as the only one of its kind, one and only unique. The Bible uses the term in describing the relation of sons and daughters to their parents. And they have some notes that they refer you to. In the Apostle John's writing, this term is used exclusively of Jesus, and again some more references, but never about Jesus' human birth or existence as a man. Instead, John uses the term to describe Jesus in his pre-human existence as the Logos, or the Word, the one who was in the beginning with God, even before the world was. And again, they have some more references. They continue. Jesus is the only begotten son because he was Jehovah's firstborn and the only one created directly by God. Again, created directly by God. While other spirit creatures are likewise called sons of the true God or sons of God, reference a few different passages out of the Tanakh, all those sons were created by Jehovah through that firstborn son, reference Colossians. In summary, the Jehovah's Witnesses state, the term monogenous refers both to Jesus being one of a kind, unique, incomparable, and to his being the only son produced directly and solely by God. And they have some more references. Now, actually, there is a lot of truth to what they just stated there. I just got to pause and let that sink in. Because of the recent scholarship on this phrase monogenous that we're going to look at here in a moment from Dr. James White, there's actually a lot of truth to what the Jehovah's Witnesses just said. I firmly disagree with their statement that Jesus is God's first creation. However, the emphasis on the uniqueness of Jesus and things like that is the only begotten son. Even though they opt for the word begotten, they do talk about the uniqueness of the unique one of a kind and things like that. Incomparable. Let's look at this from one other perspective. Of course, Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries is a Trinitarian as opposed to the Arian position that Jehovah's Witnesses hold to. Yes, you heard me say that right. I firmly believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses position amounts to, their Christology amounts to Arianism. Go back and view the last 5 videos in this Trinity series, this Shema series that I have posted on my YouTube channel to watch my talking about that. I believe that Arian theology has permeated, Christology has permeated Jehovah's Witnesses Christology, the study on who Jesus is. But let's look at John 1:14 from Dr. James White. He's got his comments posted on aomin.org. We've looked at this site before, and I'll just take the last 5 minutes of my study, go just slightly over, and we'll look at this real quick. He's got the verse pulled up right here, and the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the unique one from the Father, full of grace and truth. Notice Dr. James White uses the phrase unique one. He doesn't say begotten. Let's drop down into his commentary and pick up the reading at, I don't need to read all of it, pick up the reading in this paragraph right here. So, Dr. James White says, John 1:14 is the clear statement of the incarnation we have, yet it answers almost no questions about the mechanics of the incarnation. How did the Word become flesh without ceasing to be the Word? It is evident from the language that the Word did not stop being the Word. He simply became flesh. How was the divine Logos joined to the human nature? These questions would not even find a creedal formulation until 451 AD at the Council of Chalcedon, and even then, all we really have is our positive statements that assert what we know, and exclude any errors on those points. But the formulation does not answer the questions of how. In other words, how did God incarnate? How did the Word become incarnate? The mystery of the incarnation is a great one, and given its unique character, one that only God can explain. I understand that. Dr. White continues. John says that he tabernacled amongst us. The term was used of pitching a tent, and this would seem rather appropriate given the character of the one who became flesh. Some see a connection here with the Old Testament term shachan, from which we get Shekhinah glory, or Shekinah is how we would say it in English circles, the Shekhinah glory of God. The Hebrew term refers to the dwelling place of God and hence by extension the dwelling place of the glory of God. Jesus is described as having the glory of the unique one from the Father. Now listen to the way he's describing the monogenous that we referred to earlier. Hence, the connection seems to be well-founded. There seems to be more anti-Docetism in John's thought here. Some have conjured that John wrote this in response to some who took Paul's teaching of a cosmic Christ beyond what Paul actually said, and John is trying to reinforce the teaching that Jesus was true God and true man, not just one of the other, for he gives testimony of the fact that we have seen his glory. The believers had not just heard about him or thought they saw him, but they actually saw his glory, right? So Docetism said, no, he wasn't really there. He was just kind of a manifestation of, like he was like a spirit that was there, but he looked like, it was like a hologram, but a very elaborate hologram or something. Dr. White continues, the glory that is of the unique one from the Father, the term monogenous has been translated for a long time as only begotten. Listen up. This is not necessarily a wrong translation, but it's a bad one. It's bad in the sense that the idea of generation or begettal is absent from the term as we have it. See, originally it was thought that monogenous came from two Greek terms, monos meaning one, and a verb kanao, which means to beget. But we've discovered through further study that it actually comes from monos and a noun genes, which means kind or type. Hence, monogenous means one of a kind or unique rather than only begotten. I feel this is very important to John's thought. Jesus is the unique one from the Father. There are none like him in any way. He is the total and complete and only revelation of God to man, and as such can utter such words as 14:6 without sounding blasphemous. Dr. White concludes in this section for us tonight, Jesus is described by John as being full of grace and truth. Basically, this seems to mean that Jesus is the source of grace and truth, most probably because he is grace and truth. Jesus is the embodying of God's grace and God's truth. When one needs grace, one turns to Jesus. When one searches for truth, one is searching for a person, Jesus Christ. And that's a very well-rounded way to approach this passage. Again, notice how Dr. White is in concurrent or in agreement with the general scope of monogenous that the Jehovah's Witness talked about, how that calling Jesus the only begotten, which is focusing on his begetting or his generation or where did he come from, right? Was he birthed or was he created or something like that? But instead focusing on his uniqueness as the Son. In other words, speaking of a relation. We're going to look at this in 2 weeks a little bit more when we turn to Tim Haig's commentary on the same passage. But in closing, what we're trying to kind of focus on in 1:14 for now, when we look at the passage, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glories of the only begotten from the Father. Older scholarship focused on this idea of begotten, and the idea of how that Jesus was begotten of the Father. So they focused on the eternal generation of the Son. How is it that Jesus was begotten, like a father begets a son in human terms, means birthed or brought into existence? And thus the Arians seem to have some fuel for their argument about Jesus not being eternal. And thus the early church fathers and their what we call the bantering back and forth, the challenging back and forth, is Jesus, is he created or is he not, things like that, and all of that was in the first few centuries after the apostles put together all of the writings of the New Testament. The debates is the word I was looking for earlier that I couldn't think of. Then was this verse really focusing on Jesus' origins? Is that what the word begotten, means, monogenous? Or was it something else? And of course, we already know that this passage is rooted in a passage from the book of Psalms, where God talks. Let me see, is it over here in my reference? Let me see. If it isn't, then we'll talk about it a little bit later on, where God says, today you are my son. Here we go. It's Psalm 2:7. I will declare the decree the Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. In order for us to understand how John's using begotten and begettal and things like that, we have to go back to the book of Psalms and talk about that.